Wisdom can come from many different places. Wisdom can come from, for example, your daily life around you. Like I said before in the previous video, ma'at or chokhmah or kitum emesharim, whatever you want to call these principles of wisdom that hold together the cosmos, those grand unification theories. Let's just say wisdom herself, right? So if you want to find wisdom herself, you can't get close to her. You can't find her. She's kind of everywhere and nowhere at the same time. But wherever you find wisdom, you're finding a little shred or a little reflection of a piece of wisdom herself. So, for example, if you are farming and you come up with a new farming technique that really works, or if you observe the ants around you as they gather and create a stockpile for the wintertime, and then you think to yourself, that is a smart idea. If you are trying to measure water and you come up with a new technique for measuring it, or if you learn something about if you treat people nicely, they treat you back nicely, and you think, wow, or you reflect upon your entire community and you see that certain people who have certain ways of dealing with others make their life much harder for themselves, right? All of these are just kind of daily life. So the basic idea of wisdom, the guiding principle, is that you can observe the world around you and you can discern a natural order to the world. You can discern this from animal life, from natural processes, from humans and human interactions with each other. So wisdom isn't terribly concerned with the special revelation that you would get at Sinai. Right? That's like special revelation. God gave you some words that you wouldn't have come to any other way. You wouldn't have knowledge that Yahweh is the God of the universe any other way than Yahweh telling you. That's special revelation. And that's the kind of stuff that you see in the Torah focuses on, right? Well, wisdom literature doesn't focus on that very much. It focuses instead on what kind of knowledge can you get by looking at the world around you, studying it, observing it, and listening to other people who came before you and are passing down their wisdom and their knowledge. So, in a way, wisdom is the voice of humans. It's the voice of humans. If Psalms are the kind of words that God gives you to say in times of need and joy, Proverbs is the words that people give you because they reflected really hard upon the world and they passed down this knowledge, which ultimately is aimed at trying to get you to understand who God is through wisdom. So why would it be that God can, you can look at plants and how they grow and and then learn about who God is? I mean, that seems kind of silly maybe in some ways. But if you take a look at Proverbs chapter 3, verses 19 and 20, it tells you why. Why is it that you could look at the plants and discover who God is? Proverbs 3:19 says, "The Lord by wisdom," so Yahweh, by wisdom founded the earth. By understanding, God established the heavens. So wisdom is the principle by which God created the world. In Proverbs chapter 8, which we'll get to with Professor Yoder, there's a poem in verses 22 through 31 about how wisdom herself really was there at creation and helped create the universe. God created the universe by and through wisdom. So wisdom was there and founded the whole earth and created the whole earth and established the heavens. So by God's knowledge or wisdom, the deeps broke open and the clouds dropped down the dew. So the point is, if you look at how the world works and you understand it, you might understand something about the wisdom by which God created the world, and then you can understand something about God. Right? So the kind of you're observing the things around you and finding clues that point to something about the person who created all of this stuff. Kind of imagine yourself inside a painting and you're alive and trying to figure out who the painter is, right? So as a result, it's open to all people. The scribes consider themselves the sages because they have time to sit back and reflect, but the sages had better talk to everyone. They better talk to the farmers and listen. And what's wisdom to you? And they better talk to the parents, the mothers who are raising the children, right? They better talk and listen to them. The elders in the community who've been around and seen it all, right? The laborers who go out in the fields every day and learn about how the world actually works. The artisans who create things with their hands, right? All of these people in the world, and also your neighbors who do not believe in the same God as you. They have all of the same possibilities of access to the divine world in the same ways that you do. They might not have the same special revelation you do. They might not have Sinai, but they sure do have eyes and ears and neighbors and relatives and farms and the ability to observe the world around them, and they have the same human anatomy and physiology and the same human cognition that they can use to explore all of these things. So we have to listen to everyone if we want to come up with wisdom. So we would say the natural world then, since God created it. This is the ancient Egyptian creation story right here. We have Nut, the sky goddess, and then Geb, the earth god, who together copulated and created the earth and all of the world. And so here we have like kind of an image of the Egyptian cosmos. And that's why we'd say the natural world is itself this kind of realm for exploration, theological exploration here. We'd say also the family. Like I said, getting to know what happens in a family. This is a source of wisdom, right? The way the family works together, the farm they work on, the ethical principles that the parents have devised, and then you can look over time and see, did they work out or not, right? This family, everything worked out for them, so we should maybe try to replicate what they did. That's one way of thinking about it. Or this family didn't turn out so well, so maybe we shouldn't do what they did, right? So we all know that there's faults, there's problems with this, and we should say in wisdom literature there are always problems in the sense that you and I might come to different conclusions about what the cosmos is telling us, right? And you and I might have different conclusions about family structure. Maybe this family did everything right, but the kids came out crazy. That just happens sometimes, right? It's not their fault, not the fault of the parents sometimes, right? So in wisdom literature, they make these bold pronouncements, and then they always know that there are exceptions. It's almost like 4 out of 5 doctors agree. You're supposed to brush your teeth with Crest or whatever it is. Who's that 5th doctor who never agrees, right? In wisdom literature, there's always this kind of holding out for the possibility that they may be wrong. But they will nevertheless make these bold, huge claims that seem to encompass everything. And then they'll make another claim later on that says, well, maybe not so much. So wisdom literature is this kind of constant back and forth process about testing ideas out and trying to see what sticks. And as I said before, practical knowledge, just know-how, right? This is you go to people who know how to do stuff. So the general method then, and also the royal court, Proverbs 25 is all interested in kings and royal courts. It's because the scribes had to live with the royal court and in the royal court, but they weren't from the royal court, right? They didn't really know how to act when it came to royal courts. But also in the royal court, you'd have to grow up and learn this stuff. I don't know if you've ever seen The Crown, but Queen Elizabeth has to grow up and learn what it is to be a queen. Well, in the same way, people in the royal court have to be kind of tutored in what it is to be a king, a queen, whatever it is that they are. So there's a lot of kind of special education that goes on for people who are in these positions about how to be a judge or something like that. So we find these bits of text that are supposed to try to train the next generation of scholars, and we'll come across some of these in the handout that I've got. And then, like I said, other cultures. You can learn from anyone and everyone. You better learn from everyone and everyone. You better read Egyptian wisdom literature because they're an older tradition than ancient Israel. They were around for thousands of years before, and they're smart people. They're real smart people who've been around for a long time and who have collected a lot of wisdom. You better listen to them, right? They know how the world works better than ancient Israelites do. They could build giant pyramids, and Israel never did that. So they know more about geometry and about following the sun and the charting the stars and things. And in Mesopotamia too, they have amazing knowledge of heavenly bodies and of science in Mesopotamia and the healing traditions and medical traditions in all of these areas that far surpass what Israel has. So Israel knows that these people, Now, what Israel will do is they'll read very carefully the parts that they agree with, and they might take out the name of, Isis or Horus, and they'll put in Yahweh, right? But then they'll also tinker and change some things that just don't work with Yahwistic theology. So there's always this openness to other traditions, but also a way to try to kind of make it make sense to them and in their own discourse. Okay. One other area we'd say is theological speculation. This means just sitting back and letting it rip. You're in your backyard at night and you look up and you see the stars and you start to kind of wonder about the cosmos and the universe and who you are and all this other stuff. If you are already someone who has dedicated yourself to a life of wisdom in the ancient Near East, then you were understood to be kind of an expert on this stuff too, or you should be. Not everyone's opinions about the cosmos, the everlasting cosmos and the deities that inhabit it are important in the ancient world. Most people probably wouldn't care what what lots of people had to say about that. But if you were a sage, if you had dedicated your life to the pursuit of wisdom, then maybe you would have some thoughts about bigger wisdom, right? What is woman wisdom like, right? Ma'at, right? What is she like? In Mesopotamia, here's Ea or Enki. That's his Sumerian name and his Babylonian name. But here he got like a fish coming out of his armpits. Even worse than stinky pits, you got crawfish pits or something. But anyway, he lived in the deep, and he was the god of the deep, who you can see has got a horned hat, right? He's the god of the deep, and he lives in the deep and thinks big thoughts, and he helped to create the world and so on. So he's kind of like the Ma'at in a way. There's some big differences, but of Mesopotamia, and he's like kind of the wisdom god. And so if you wanted to try to understand Ea or Enki or Ma'at or Chokhmah, woman wisdom in Israel, then you needed to spend a lot of time sitting back and thinking and trying to imagine what the world was like, right? This theological speculation we can see in the Bible too. We can see this, for example, in Proverbs chapter 8, where this person, the sage, is talking in the voice of woman wisdom about what it was like to be there at the beginning of creation, the beginning of the cosmos. We can also see at the end of Job the discourse from God, God's speech from the whirlwind. This is an amazing bit of theological speculation here, and it's a marvelous poem and a beautifully deep theology, which we'll get to in about a week. And then Ecclesiastes. A lot of this is about looking at the world around you and saying, what does this tell us about who God is? What kind of God made a world like this? Ecclesiastes has got some pretty interesting things to say about that too, but we'll get to that later. So the basic finding, if we're going to kind of add up all of this stuff and say, what is it that wisdom has to teach us, and what did it teach people in the ancient world? There's the basic method, like what they did was observe the world and try to find the hidden structures in the world through looking at all different aspects of life. They would start from initial observations, like I saw someone get real drunk and his life didn't go out well for him, and then they would move up to kind of like broader generalizations. I guess getting drunk all the time doesn't help you, right? And then they would move to a prescription. They would tell you what to do. Don't get drunk, right? So this is kind of how the process works, the method for producing wisdom. And sometimes wisdom shows us kind of different stages in this process, like the literature itself, right? But part of it is that there's a community out there, and that community needs to kind of help you think about this stuff over time. So you need to listen to your elders because they've been around a lot longer. They might not always get it right, but they're passing down wisdom that's been filtered through the generations. And that basic finding, the basic thing, the principle that all these cultures agree on is this. It's about deeds and consequences. The things that you do matter. Actually, sounds like a kind of ridiculous thing to even say, right? Everyone, of course, would agree in that. But just think about this. One scholar, Klaus Koch, had said that the basic finding is that there is a sphere of destiny. A sphere of destiny. And what that means is every single choice that you make, every single thing that you do impacts your ability to do things in the future. Now, C.S. Lewis has a little bit about this in, I think it's Mere Christianity. He says it's kind of like, think about your life as a big wood block, and you start to carve little pieces of it away, and then you're left with like less options than you had before, right? And so if you start to kind of sculpt a picture of, carving of a wolf or something, and you start to kind of carve some things away, and you can't make it a giraffe anymore because you don't have a long neck. You cut that part off, right? That part of the wood block. Maybe you could turn it into an airplane or something, right? You're reducing your possibilities the further on you get in the process. And what the wisdom folks say, and what the sages say in the ancient Near East, is every choice you make impacts your future ability to make choices. So you can do a lot of things at the beginning of your life, but you have to, like, let's say you waste all your time. You don't actually work at anything. You don't actually learn any skills or anything like that. You've reduced your possible destiny. Let's say that you learn lots of skills when you're young. You're actually increasing your sphere of destiny, your range of motion. If you make lots of decisions like you get drunk and high all the time, you're reducing your possibilities in life. If you study so much that you don't care about other people and don't really pay attention to them, you're also reducing your sphere of possibilities, right? You're kind of pushing yourself down a track. It's never too late to change, according to wisdom literature, but also sometimes it gets pretty late to change. If you're a hothead, you get ready for a life of trouble. But you can try to change, right? But you have to first recognize that you have to kind of assume a posture of humility in the face of God and everyone else, right? I recognize that I need to learn. If you say, I need to learn, then you radically increase your sphere of destiny. Your possibilities for a good life increase, and then you can start to make better choices. But still, if you do that when you're 80, you got less of a chance than if you do that when you're, say, 15. So reaching people when they're young is a big important part of wisdom literature. So it's not that God comes down out of the clouds to throw a lightning bolt at you and hit you if you do bad things. In other parts of the Old Testament, God gets really involved in the day-to-day operations of human life, right? And God's justice sometimes is kind of long forbearing, right? But eventually God gets involved. In wisdom literature, it's like your bad choices come back to get you. It's not that God throws lightning bolts out of the sky to get you. It's that you undermine yourself. God's justice is when you dig a pit to trap someone else in it and you fall into it yourself. That's the way that God works. God creates a world that actually operates according to certain logic. And if you don't follow that logic and you spurn God and the pursuit for wisdom, you're going to get trapped in something. So that it's a very different way of thinking about how God works than, say, like Deuteronomy, which is if you do well, it goes well for you, and if you sin, it's going to go poorly for you. So wise people discern the structures by which God built the world, and they live accordingly. Your own bad deeds hurt you in the end. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. Feel free to ask questions about this in the comments if it doesn't. But you can see how now that if you go, we're going to read Proverbs and you'll be like, oh, okay, I see all that stuff at work, right? So we could say that in sum, ancient Eastern wisdom is really human reflection on the cosmos, on the world, and on ourselves that produces knowledge. And wisdom, right? By that, here you see a scribe. That's his job, is to not only do the work of producing wisdom, but also trying to write it down and teach others. And just telling others the facts doesn't really work, so they build these, really almost like puzzles. The book of Proverbs, think of it as a big puzzle book. You're supposed to figure out, well, what is this thing really trying to teach me? And as I mentioned before, the sages are those ancient intelligentsia. They're the ones that actually do this work in ancient Israel. They're the knowledge producers. And by the way, that's you too. You now are in graduate school, and you are one of the knowledge producers for the church. So that's why I recommend really taking the wisdom literature seriously and trying to think about how it might help you think about teaching others and leading the church today in a world of complete chaos. Which also these wisdom authors, these scribes and sages, they found themselves in those positions too. The world totally collapsed for the scribes and sages in Jerusalem during the period of the exile, right? Their world really did collapse. And the things that they did was they produced the prophetic literature like Jeremiah and Ezekiel. Those were scribes that put it together like Baruch and framed those teachings, but also they produced things like Job. I think Job was written in response to the Babylonian exile. And are we going to produce something like like Job in response to our own crisis of the day? I don't know. We'll have to see, but it's not going to be just random people who do it. It's going to be people who trained for this moment. So maybe that's you. And we could say in Israel, this tradition was headed up by Solomon. I'm sure Professor Yoder will talk about Solomon when we get to Proverbs. But just like David kind of represents the Psalms and Moses represents the Torah, Solomon represents the wisdom tradition. And so everything in the wisdom tradition is in some way associated with Solomon, even if we don't think he actually wrote a lot of this stuff, in the same way that David didn't write all of the Psalms. For example, in the Proverbs, it's like, Solomon wrote all the Proverbs, right? Well, actually, chapter 25 says King Hezekiah's men copied a bunch of this stuff. Chapter 31, says that these are, actually, throughout the book, King Lemuel's mother. There's other people who kind of produced a lot of the book of Proverbs, and their names are recorded as people who produced this wisdom. So all to say that it's self-consciously the work of many people, and of course it should be, right? It's traditional literature. A proverb isn't a proverb unless it's been used a lot of times. Who wrote a proverb? No one, because it only becomes a proverb after it's been used and handed down and gets shop-worn after many, many years. Now, I know King says that Solomon wrote all the Proverbs, but they only became proverbs if they were useful. So it's this long-standing tradition that involves scribes, that involves families and common people, and it involves kings and the royal courtyard, and all that stuff gets tied together in the wisdom literature. And as I said, Job. We'll get Proverbs, Job, Ecclesiastes. Those are the main wisdom books. There's also non-canonical, at least for you Protestants and Reformed folks especially. There's sort of extra canonical stuff that was produced in the ancient world, like Sirach or Ben Sira. You can also call this Ecclesiasticus, not to be confused with Ecclesiastes. And there's other books as well, like The Wisdom of Solomon, an ancient Christian book, probably, most likely, which was produced kind of in the spirit of Proverbs and so on. We don't have time to get into a lot of those extra biblical texts. There's also wisdom at Qumran and the Dead Sea Scrolls, but we'll have to save that for another day for some other course. All right, so we got one more video, and I'm going to ask you all to reflect upon the handout, and I will put this on the screen for the next video, and I'll ask you all to read along with me, and we'll just kind of I'll chat a bit about some of these texts, but then I'm going to ask you to for your form assignments to really interact with these. We're gonna pick a couple of these and talk about them. All right, I'll see you all in the next video.